Welcome to Impact Unicorns, the podcast where you meet inspirational entrepreneurs building the next generation of transformative companies. And now, here is your host, Dr. Indranil Ghosh, award-winning author, investor, and advisor to global leaders.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Impact Unicorns. Today I'm delighted to welcome Andre Moreira to the show. Andre is the founder and CEO of Novihum, a company that manufactures a soil-enhancing product that increases soil organic content and nutrient levels and removes the need to use conventional fertilizers. When used as part of a regenerative agricultural system, Novihum's decade-long scientific trials have shown that its soil enhancer can increase the carbon content and intrinsic fertility of agricultural soils. Andre came to the helm of Novihum from a senior operational and investing role at BASF, the global chemicals company. In today's podcast, he'll talk about how his passion and concern for soil sustainability around the world helped him make the jump into entrepreneurial life, and how impact businesses like Novihum may soon find tangible financial support from the evolving space of carbon markets. Andre, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Indranil. It's a pleasure to be here today with you.
Andre, I'm delighted to be talking about Novihum on today's show. It's an extremely exciting company bringing health back to agricultural soil around the world, and has amazing carbon sequestration potential as well. Agriculture and regenerative agriculture is something that's a recurring theme on this show. And we actually had one of our common friends, Detlef Schoen, who you know well, on the show a few episodes ago, setting the scene for regenerative agriculture and the potential that it holds.
Yes.
So I'm delighted that we can, build on that and talk about the amazing soil enhancing product that you have, Novihum, which is a real soil stimulant and leads to more crop productivity, higher nutrition content crops, which I think, without even explaining it in great detail, is obvious to everyone, holds the potential for great impact in the world. So terrific to have you on the show, and I'm very excited about our conversation.
Thank you. It is indeed, as you say, we say usually it's instant fertility when you're using the product. Yeah, and this is really a core topic that really drives us here in the company and myself personally in bringing this into the markets and for the future of mankind.
Fabulous. Andre, can we start by maybe giving the listeners a thumbnail tour of your career and how you got to this stage of leading this very exciting company? Because every entrepreneur's story is different. Most people don't wake up and drop out of the crib and become an entrepreneur, or actually don't start a business from their garage. They often have long experienced careers, distinguished careers, and come to entrepreneurship with a much fuller toolkit. And this is the mold of your story, I think. So tell us a little bit about your journey so far.
Sure. This is really a process. I mean, it's not, as you say, you don't fall from the bed and you are an entrepreneur. Of course, you have to have some kind of fire in your belly and wish to do things and change things, which I do have, fortunately. I come from a family of immigrants. My father immigrated from Portugal to Brazil in the 60s, made a family there. We moved back from Brazil to Portugal, and this already gives you a sense of the kind of environment I grew up. I mean, there were small entrepreneurs, and in a sense you see this and you learn a lot on those stages. And as I grew up, I decided against all odds to study physics, because for some reason I loved it and I love it. and from there started a career that was, you could call more a corporate type career here in Germany. I mean, went to a BASF, which is a chemical company, and grew there from a scientist, as a trained scientist, into somebody who's in business. And at some stage, as I say, I got the startup virus. I was doing investments for BASF in startups. And at some point I said, you know what, I really want one day to try this, but knowing what I know, it has to be the right one. And there were a lot of topics coming in. I mean, what type of problems are the startup solving, which stage the startup is, and so on. And there was a chance to join Novihum as a CEO. My predecessor entered retirement age. That's another point that I always highlight people. You can start any time. I mean, I know many entrepreneurs that started after they were in their 50s and very successful. And therefore, there was an opening here, chance, and after a good discussion at home to see, okay, do I leave my cozy job or not? I mean, we with the family support, we just moved in, and it's all in.
Well, that is quite a transition, but in some ways, quite a managed transition. So you have your great corporate role, one of the biggest chemical companies in the world, BASF. You move from operations into the investing role. Mm-hmm. So you begin to get a view into the world of entrepreneurs by investing in them, probably getting a very good sense of what it takes to be successful in terms of the business, but also as a venture leader, what it takes to be a good entrepreneur. And then you almost cherry pick your way into the best of the options that you see in front of you. But nevertheless, there's still that challenge, that nervous step off what might seem like a steep cliff into taking the seat as a venture CEO. And like you said, important discussions to have with your family, given the change in the risk profile of your career. Tell us a little bit more about how you went about making that important first step into entrepreneurship.
Sure. The most important thing that one has to realize, and I realized also in that phase, is that no matter how hard you do due diligence on the company, no matter how hard you understand this market and so on, you always get surprises when you actually take the step. So if you are prepared for that, and it happened, of course. I mean, when I came here, there were a few surprises. I did a very strong due diligence, if you will, in the company. I literally used some of the techniques that we use to do due diligence in startups. I use that in doing my due diligence, should I join Novihum or not. But I think that in the end, what comes through is that you have to have a burning belief, desire, whatever you want to call this, to bring something into the market that you think is really going to change the game. Yeah, and that was really and is, in fact, the driver to join Novihum. Yeah, I started doing some reading on soils, what's going on in the soils in the world, and so on. And I really got very concerned. And I got especially concerned because I didn't see back then enough movement, enough companies, enough ideas that were really addressing this. And so that really lit the fire in my belly, and that's how I did this transition. And again, you have to be prepared for a lot of surprises. You have to be prepared to go through very tough times. Yeah, when sleepless nights and people complaining, investors complaining, everybody complaining. I mean, you have to be prepared for that. That's clear. Yeah. However, if you have a clear mindset and mission of what you want to do as an entrepreneur, it's the most rewarding thing you can do. I look back and I definitely do not regret.
The passion and the conviction you need to have to lead a company that has the potential to change the world, needs to be taken not lightly, right? Because if you want to change the world, you actually have to change a lot of people's hearts and minds. And so the amount of persistence and persuasion that is required to talk to the people in the supply chain, the regulators, the investors, to build that momentum for change
which isn't necessary for starting any business, but is kind of a unique feature of starting impact businesses, because they, by definition, to have impact, you need to change the system to some degree. Yeah. Did you go into this venture with your eyes wide open about how big that task would be? And what have you learned so far in terms of how to make that change a reality?
Yeah, absolutely. I knew, or at least I had an idea of what was coming. If you know perfectly everything that is coming, you probably get too scared. So it's good that sometimes a little bit of ignorance also is in the mix. But apart from that, it is one thing that if you have this sense of mission and you understand, as you put it very nicely, I mean, it's about impact. It's about moving the needle. Yeah, it's not about, oh, now I have this business and I'm gonna get a few million to the side and now I can have my Bentley to drive around. Okay, fine. I mean, it's all very legitimate and people can do this. And people do this very successfully, but that's not what my driver is in this case. I think if people are not concerned or outright scared about what's happening with climate change, then I would be, let's say, surprised with people that are not seeing what's going on. I mean, I remember talking to my father before he passed away some time ago, and I was asking, when you were a child in Portugal, how was the weather? Just to have a feeling. I mean, we can look all the data you want, right? But I mean, how was the weather back then? And it was completely different from today. They even had snow in the areas where he used to live. They don't have this anymore. If you ask the same thing here to my parents-in-law here in Germany, you get very similar answers as well. And you see what's happening with the weather and all that. So we need to find solutions, and there is a whole spectrum of solutions that we need to find to leave a world behind us that is not worse than what we found. We all know that climate change is going on for a long time, since the 70s. This is being discussed. Now we are really seeing the first real effects that you can sense in everyday's life. I mean, probably saw this news, I think it came on BBC yesterday, that we have now doubled the number of days with more than 50 Celsius per year. So we're talking, I think, 30 or 40 days a year in specific places of the world where they have temperatures higher than 50 Celsius. I mean, this is scary. And so we have to move, we have to do stuff. And this is what I think has to be also behind the drive of a impact entrepreneur.
And according to the latest IPCC report, it went on to underline what we already knew, which is that we have a very short amount of time to make a very big change in the decarbonization of the planet. And give us a recap as to why regenerative agriculture and the soil is potentially one big things that we could do to make a significant impact in reducing atmospheric carbon.
Sure. Indranil, it's a little bit like terraforming, if you will. If you remember, in the 70s and 80s, we had this sci-fi look into what we were going to do in Mars and all that. I mean, they used to call it terraforming. And in a sense, we have to start doing terraforming in our own planet. Yeah. So we do have, even if you would turn off today all CO2 emission in the world, it's quite clear that we already have too much CO2 in the atmosphere. Now, you have to extract the CO2 somehow. We have to reduce it from where it is today to levels that are, let's say, less problematic in terms of greenhouse effect and so on. And to do that, you have to do it at a planetary scale. And there are very few things that come to my mind that are as planetary as agriculture. Because, I mean, you have agriculture everywhere. And by nature, agriculture does fix CO2, if done right, does fix CO2 in equivalent in the soil. And therefore, regenerative agriculture that is on scale, taking carbon seriously, fixed long-term in the soil, can move the needle and have a planetary impact. You know?
And the idea behind it is that the way we've been doing conventional farming for decades now with basically tilling the soil, which tends to erode soil structure, planting the same crop every year, which tends to take out the same nutrients, not putting enough carbon organic content back into the soil, actually ends up reducing the amount of carbon that's sequestered in the soil, in good, healthy soil. And on top of that, you have the degrading effects potentially of fertilizers as well, which end up being a zero-sum game, because you end up getting, declining returns from adding more fertilizer. And it's the only way to increase productivity of basically unhealthy soils. But after a point, adding more fertilizer doesn't really help you very much. So you get into this destructive cycle. And whereas agriculture could be this form of natural direct air capture of carbon dioxide, it ends up actually releasing carbon that's already trapped in the soil if done badly. Mm-hmm. So regenerative agriculture, like you say, is a planetary approach to getting back to the levels of carbon that we had in the soil initially, before we started to degrade it through irresponsible sort of conventional agriculture. Mm-hmm. And Novihum is a catalyst, it seems, a soil stimulant, a soil supplement, if I can call it that, mm-hmm. that can even enhance that process of soil regeneration and put more carbon back into the soil than was there initially. Yes. So tell us a little bit about what Novihum is and how it can have this startling impact.
So one thing that I would like to say is that agriculture per se, and the fact that we start using mineral fertilizers and so on, it saved us from hunger and all that, for sure, over the history in the grand scheme of things, but at the cost of something that over the years became clear, and that the cost of soil health. Yeah. So yes, we were able to feed the world and do it in a way that is highly industrialized. But on the other hand, what happened is that the soil health suffered, and we are now beginning to pay that. Why that's the case? Because we see, for instance, that about 300 million hectares in the world today, and that's about 20% of the total agricultural land being used today, is already suffering of diminished fertilization. We are losing arable land by about 10 million hectares or 12 million hectares per year, because the topsoil cannot hold itself. The carbon that is like the glue in that soil, that the soul of that soil is not there anymore. So there are really issues there. And what Novihum does is that we pick up what we call ancient carbon, so fossilized raw material that we use. We do chemistry on it to revive it. And by doing so, what we have in the end is a product that is chemically like what you call in English stable humus. The stable humus is a very special fraction of the humic matter, of the organic matter in soil, and has two effects. I mean, in itself, organic matter that enriches the soil, but also catalyzes the life in the soil so that you have more production of organic matter in the soil. So it really becomes a catalyst for life and organic matter fixation. And in the end, what we can show is that there is a net effect that is very positive of keeping carbon in the soil and bringing the soil back to life, if you want. So really keep starting.
If you're enjoying Impact Unicorns, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell to receive notifications of new shows. Bring the most relevant impact venture stories to the podcast. If you would like to review the show, go to the Apple Podcasts mobile app or iTunes to leave a rating and review.
So this is really interesting. So the fossilized matter you're talking about is lignite, which is brown mm-hmm. coal, right?
Yes.
And at a time when we're trying to shut down coal production because it's used for energy and releases carbon dioxide into the soil, here's a fascinating use of that lignite that could keep some of those mines going potentially, but now using it in a much more constructive way. So you're taking that carbon matter, you're enhancing it, you're creating a soil stimulant which increases the amount of organic content of the soil, which is good from the point of view of the nutrition that the soil can provide the crops. But by definition, because you've got more organic matter that is composed of carbon, which ultimately is coming from the atmosphere. So you're sequestering carbon back into the soil and making the soil richer, solving two problems at once. And also a third, which comes back to the whole idea of an impact business, is that this is good for business, presumably, because now you're actually finding a way to increase crop yield and the nutritional content of food without having to use potentially damaging fertilizers, or at least less of them. So, I mean, this is a real incredible trifecta of value.
Absolutely. And we have the data showing exactly the effect that you can use less fertilizer, you increase the quality of the crop, you have more sellable crop when you're using this. It's all coming down to the fact that you are increasing significantly soil health. Yeah. So and so this all comes together. So not only you're fixing the carbon in the soil and increasing the health of the soil, by using less fertilizer, you're also emitting less CO2 because you don't have to use so much of the NPK and so on, you have to transport it, and so on and so forth. So there are several effects coming together, not only making the farmer being able to produce more produce, more crops, but also producing higher quality, which obviously in the end comes down to the bottom line. So yes, the product per se is great for the environment, but also is great for business.
And these aren't just idle claims. You've been doing scientific testing on this for over a decade, I think. So maybe you could walk us through a little bit of the scientific evidence behind the product.
Yes, that's one of my favorite parts, Indranil, because really, I mean, given my background, of course, but not only, is really the fact that, as you are aware, in agriculture, there is a lot of people claiming a lot of things that often, unfortunately, not really right. So we did a very rigorous program of looking into what happens to the yield, what happens in the soil. So we have, I mean, north of 800 single individual data points looking into different aspects. So it's a huge program that we have in front of us. And using also pretty sophisticated analysis methods. We work with a university, with a professor in university to really extract the data, really the information from the data that we have and all that. So what you can say really for sure is that you have on a meta level, meta-analysis, you have at least 10% yield increase on top of anything that you're doing as a farmer, meaning you're a farmer and you are already pushing everything to the limit and you get still 10% on top of it at least. Several farmers reporting back 20, 30%. Yeah. That's one thing. And the other thing that we really see a lot is that you have a higher availability of some of the nutrients in the soil. And that gets reflected also in the plant. For instance, we see this data coming from Spain, for instance, that you see iron. There's a significant amount of iron that the plants are able to extract when they are exposed to Novihum. Iron is important for photosynthesis, which is obviously important for biomass creation and all this. So you really see that it's, in the end, you have more yield because you have more availability of nutrients. Now you see also that there is a stimulation of mycorrhiza. I mean, significant. I mean, the mycorrhiza population explodes when Novihum is applied. So you have all that, and that's not magic. It's science, hardcore science, in the data that we collected, so that we can make these kind of claims and also be able to tell our farmers where to use it best, how to use it best, which crop, which soils, and so on.
And my understanding is that you've been running side-by-side control experiments on the same farm, same soil, literally two different parts of the field for over a decade to prove everything that you just said.
Yes.
Okay. Extraordinary. One of the questions about regenerative farming is that, maybe you don't get the economic output if you farm in a regenerative way versus a conventional way. But what you're saying is that you're almost turning that on its head, that if you use Novihum, you can get some sort of an impact, even if you're not changing anything else. But if you combine that with the change of farming practices, with crop rotation, rather than losing productivity or yield, you can keep it the same or increase it. Is that a fair statement?
That is absolutely right. And I can even tell you that we have seen over and over the effect that Novihum reinforces any effect that you have in crop rotation. It enhances that significantly, and we have also again data, as you already realized. So that is really the way, in our opinion. That's why we see ourselves very much at the core of the regenerative agriculture movement, because we see here the chance to make it to give a kind of an insurance, if you will, for anybody who is going that direction. Here is a product that will really help enhance your soil and will help enhance your bottom line. In the end of the day, you don't have to depend on the common practice that we have today. There are long-term really making soils worse.
Well, even with this data, which is very persuasive, you still have to go and change the hearts and minds of the customers and the distributors. So focusing on that part of the business, what's been your experience so far as to how the industry is beginning to react to this new opportunity?
Yeah, we see more and more farmers coming to us, and because they have this concern on their soil. There is indeed a lot of people coming back to us on that. Farmers see themselves correctly as the stewards of the land. And therefore, in our opinion also, I mean, anything that we'll do in this direction is always done together with the farmers. Yeah. It doesn't take away the reality of life that they have to pay their bills and everything else. So of course there is a element of trial, an element of persuasion, an element of working with lead farmers that take the leap of faith and see, okay, let's see what this product does. So this has been the work that we have been doing the last few years, and with more and more success, we have more and more, not only farmers, but now also distributors that are working with us in taking the product and bringing this to their farms to create the kind of depth that we want to have as a whole.
And are there any regions of the world where you see evidence that the regenerative agriculture movement is taking off, maybe faster than others? And does that map to where your lead customers are?
Yeah, I think that at this stage, we see quite a bit of interest in the United States. There is quite clearly more often in the discussions this point of regenerative agriculture. We see also here in Europe. We see this also in Germany. We see every now and then people from France also asking questions on this, Spain. Now, we have to be a little bit careful on our statistics of that, because we, in a sense, we live in a little bit of a bubble, right? Because the people that are drawn to us and the people that we're talking to, they will have naturally a certain affinity to do this type of agriculture. Yeah? So I don't want to say that this is evidence that's very strong, but I mean, clearly there is a higher interest, if you will, and a higher openness on the farmer side today than 5 years ago to use our product. Yeah.
And is there any investment required by the farmer to start using Novihum and start more regenerative practices? Presumably, they need to do a pilot to make sure that it works for them. Mm-hmm. But beyond that, in cash-strapped farms, one of the big issues is, do you have the ability to invest to change anything? So what are you asking the farmer to do, and how much does it cost them?
Essentially, it will depend very much on the crop. I mean, if you're talking about cash crops, it's much easier for the farmer than if you're talking potato or corn. The way we position the product and the way that we know that the product works, it's also viable for those cash-strapped farms, because they will not need on a hectare basis a budget that's higher than what they would use usually for fertilizers as well. Okay, and the beauty of the product is that because of its stability, if you're putting this year 100 kilograms per hectare, let's say, or 200 kilos per hectare of this product, you're doing this every year, you are actually accumulating the product. So after 5 years, after 10 years, you have a ton or 2 tons of the product that is still working in the ground. Now, when we start with the farmer and make our recommendations for this crop soil, we give them what we would call the minimum amount that they have to put in order to see already good effect in the first. because we are very conscious that farmers with their cash strapped, we want to make sure that they have from day one something back from the product, not have to wait for a year or 2 or 3 before they actually see the product paying for itself. We do this from day one, and we adjust our recommendations to the farmers depending on which crops they have, which type of soils they have, so that it fits their budget on the one hand, knowing that they will be, as they are doing this on a regular basis, they'll be accumulating this good stuff in the soil over time.
Right. So a farmer conceivably could almost replace their fertilizer cost over time with an investment in Novihum. And I think a really important point is this cumulative effect. It's not if you put the fertilizer in, it gets washed away, and you do it again the next year, then you're back to square one, maybe even negative with some soil erosion. You're actually building this up year by year. So it's an annual investment over a period of time to upgrade, the soil and give you cumulative benefits in terms of productivity.
Exactly. I couldn't put it better. It's exactly that. You are over time, and I mean, we have some estimates, but I mean, after 5 or 7 or 8 years, you might be even able to skip some years of fertilization, because you will have a soil that will be retaining and putting this so much more availability for the fertilizer, for the plant of the nutrients, that you might be able to even skip years. Yeah. Now, we would not recommend that from day one. Don't get me wrong. I mean, you have to make a transition, and depends, of course, also on how much of the material do you put in the soil. Also depends on your objective. For instance, I'm thinking of a tomato producer we have in Spain. He essentially put 2 tons of Novihum in the soil per hectare. Yeah, that's way beyond what we have been recommending. But he's happy, and he's getting like 25% more yield, and he says, I'm good with it. I mean, I don't want to change it. Let's keep doing this. It's okay, good. Yeah. So it's very flexible. That's the beauty of it. Yeah, because it just persistent, remains in the soil, it builds up.
Over the past 20 years, I've worked with hundreds of entrepreneurs to build impact unicorns. In my experience, every company that has a transformative positive effect on the world does so by building strong partnerships with communities, investors, and governments to solve society's biggest challenges. If you'd like to learn more about how innovative entrepreneurs can help to build a more sustainable and inclusive future, read my award-winning book, Powering Prosperity, A Citizen's Guide to Shaping the 21st Century.
Now, of course, if you are able to prove that you're sequestering significant amounts of carbon, there is potentially a big upside to the farmer, and maybe some of it flows through to you as well, which we can discuss, from carbon credits. So tell us about how that may play into this as a bit of a wild card to maybe transform farming or regenerative farming into, an extraordinarily profitable business, because it has a function which may soon have a measurable value associated with it in terms of the price of carbon.
Yes, it is one of our favorite topics, because we have really solid data showing that you have carbon accumulation, net carbon accumulation in 2 specific trials that we have here in Germany, long-term trials, really very long-term trials. So that's why we are really very excited about this. We see this also, the increase in organic matter in other farms. And so there is a whole element of data telling us, screaming at us. I mean, this is begging to have carbon credits done. And so we have been in the last few months in contact with a number of experts in this area. And what we see really is that 2 things. Now, coming from the entrepreneur side, it is a very complex area, as I realized over time. And so it's a nascent area that we want to be part of. And absolutely, if this is something that is not only helping the environment, but also bringing to our farmers and into the company an extra revenue that is coupled with this great environmental effect, which is the fixing of the carbon, then it's really a great thing and an opportunity that we see happening in the midterm for us. I mean, we're right now starting the process, which is pretty complex, of getting carbon certification. One thing that is really important also that the listeners understand, I mean, it's not enough just to use Novihum in the soil and then that's it. I mean, you have to have the Novihum in a context where plants will be growing and all that. So that I think is clear. And by doing so, we think that in the midterm, I'm talking maybe a year or two, we're beginning to have hard carbon credits that will be issuing together with every kilogram of Novihum that's sold.
So explain how the business model works around the carbon credits. How are they issued? How are they traded? Who gets the monetary benefit? Is it the farmer? Is it you? Some combination?
It's all in flux right now. So I mean, this is really up for discussion. We can imagine different models. I mean, we can imagine exactly the first model, which is okay. You're selling the product. You are giving the carbon credits to the farmer as part of a discount, yeah, and so you retain the carbon credits and give the discount to the farmer, or you can just say, you know what, I'm going to talk to an investor who needs 100,000 tons of CO2 per year carbon credits, and let this person buy or pay us for a factory, and we build the factory, and every carbon credit that is generated from that factory goes to this group, for instance. I mean, it's all in flux right now. We can see maybe it's going to even be a mix of that in the end. We can also think of doing what you would call carbon as a service in soils, meaning you do a promise of a certain level of carbon and you get something like a annual fee for that. And by doing so, you monetize the carbon credits that you get by doing the service of keeping or increasing the carbon levels at a customer. So there are many ways that we are right now, as you can hear, we are right now in this brainstorming phase of what are we going to do with this aspect of Novihum that is really exciting and that we are putting in place.
So there's actually a world where instead of farmers having to pay for Novihum, they may just get Novihum, knowing that they'll get paid back and be able to pay you from a stream of carbon credits in the future. So it's a bit like energy savings, right? You know, you can often get the capital equipment funded off balance sheet, and you pay back the investor from the energy savings that you accrue over a certain number of years. Similar concept.
Exactly.
But rather than actually requiring the farmer to make an investment, it's a way of actually freeing up cash flow for them. And still getting to fertilize their soil.
Yes. I think one aspect that is really important in this equation is what is the price of CO2. That will play a huge role in this business. At today's prices, and at our today's production costs and all that, it doesn't fit yet. But quite clearly, you see the trend. I mean, the CO2 will go up. I mean, I think there is no doubt on that. And therefore, you can see that this model in the midterm will be the model to go. Yeah. Or a model to go. I don't want to promise that too much. I'm always very careful about this. What is for sure is that you can see that by having this kind of out-of-the-box models and new models for products like Novihum, you will be creating a kind of a leverage effect on fixing CO2 in the soil, which is the end game. I mean, of course, we're excited about Novihum and what we are doing with it and all the effects that are great for the farmers and the plants and all that. But if you think in the longer term perspective and what we talked in the beginning, what is really driving us, the fact that you're moving the needle, and you can move the needle only if you have acceptance and having a market depth that is really at a planetary scale. And so this kind of out-of-the-box models that are creating a certain service around carbon, for instance, those are the ones that we think in the end will be the models that will achieve.
Yes, it's like soil becomes an asset because it becomes a stock of carbon that has a value. And so the more you build up your stock of carbon, the more valuable your agricultural soil as an asset is.
Exactly. That's exactly it. I think there will be, at least in my now early days of learning about how all these carbon credits markets work and all that, there will be a need for some adjustments on that level too, to get the right type of programs that are done for this kind of products. But I am quite optimistic that this is something that in the next few years, and we're talking really a time horizon of 3 years mostly, all this kind of topics will be addressed properly. And so you have the chance of having Novihum and similar products that are doing this kind of work in the soil being more widespread and as part of a service for the farmers. You know?
Now, of course, to take full advantage of that, it's time for growth. So tell us about how you're now going through that S-curve from proof of concept, getting the initial buy-in from the farmers and the distributors, to going large scale, not just in Germany, but the US and globally.
Mm-hmm. We spent the last few years doing a lot of our homework with farmers, right? To the point that now this year we're going to be basically sold out on the product. We have a pilot plant here in Germany that we're very proud of, because we could prove very well with a production of 1,000 tons roundabout per year that we know how to produce this product continuously in a very economical way. So we tick really all the boxes. We have the farmers, we have the distributors, we have the data. We are now sold out, so the next box. And we have also the first offtakes, where customers are, distributors telling us, I mean, we intend to buy this much 1,000 tons from you in the next few years, and so on. So we have all those boxes ticked. Now really is the last step. It's really the scale up, is to build a big factory here, and serve the customers, serve the market, and use that as a nucleus for further factories worldwide, either our own or licensing or joint ventures. We have all kinds of discussions going on that front as well. But I mean, in the end of the day, Indranil, is really about scaling. That's where we are. That's what's in front of us. And that's what we want to do, so that we can serve this market and again, move the needle.
Yes, and that scale up is so important. And a lot of people are looking at this sort of 10-year window, 15-year window that we have to make a big impact on climate change. And I think it's always important to remember it's not a linear process. You don't get to that 50% reduction in 10 to 15 years in a straight line. It is very exponential.
Yes.
The hard work that you've done now to prove the concept, to make sure that there are no unintended detrimental side effects of using a product like this. You've shown how to integrate it into a farming system. You've built out, the basics of a supply chain and a distribution and marketing model. This then, may not show up in the statistics of carbon captured or amount of regenerative agriculture deployed. But if you're able to go through the scale-up process and, really get wider adoption, 10 to 15 years from now, you wake up and you think, wow, actually, there was, millions of hectares that were brought under this model, and it's having a huge impact. So we need to be patient, but the scale-up is the key. So what are you hoping to have achieved, let's say, a year or 2 years from now on this journey?
Absolutely. I mean, clear idea that in 2 years' time we have our first 50 to 100,000 tons factory up and running. We know how to build it. We have all the partnerships. We have even the land here waiting for us. It's only a matter of now getting the finances together. We are having, as you can imagine, a lot of discussions going on with investors, and get it done. Get it done. Get it out. Get it into the hands of the farmers and the hands of the distributors, and from there, really scale beyond this scale. 100,000 tons is for us right now a big scale. But again, in the large scheme of things, that's nothing. It's a small thing overall. And now looking to the 10, 15 years from a timeline, as you're mentioning, we really want to be producing, selling, and positioning millions of tons of this product in the market, preferably everywhere in the world. the more the better, because it's exactly the point of making sure that we get as much carbon in the soil as we can.
Fabulous. Well, Andre, I wish you the best of luck with your endeavors. The world needs your product. The world needs success and adoption of regenerative agriculture. So thank you so much for your time on the show today. And hopefully we can touch base in a few months or a year or two and see how you're getting along, how the market's evolved. A pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you, Indranil. It was really a pleasure, really wonderful speaking with you, and really being able to showcase this and talk a little bit about our passion that we have here. Thank you so much.
If you've enjoyed this episode of Impact Unicorns, don't forget to rate and review this show by scrolling down and clicking Rate This Podcast. And join me next week as I talk to more inspirational entrepreneurs building the next generation of transformative companies.